Getting started, the new Lee Jae-myung government, Lee's trip to the G7 in Canada, and much more next on The Impossible State.
North Korea is the impossible state. It's a place that stumped leaders and policymakers for more than 3 decades. It has a complex history, and it has become the United States' top national security priority. Each week on this show, we'll talk with the people who know the most about North Korea.
Welcome to another episode of the Impossible State podcast at CSIS. I'm your host, Victor Cha, President of Geopolitics and Foreign Policy and Korea Chair at CSIS and Professor at Georgetown University. Today, we're going to be discussing the new Lee Jae-myung government in South Korea. Their start, they're only a couple of weeks, like barely over a week old now, but already a lot has happened. The visit to the G7, we'll spend some time talking about that in Canada. And I'm joined by 2 terrific guests today. Let me introduce them to you. Kwon is a senior journalist at the British Broadcasting Corporation, otherwise known as BBC, based in Seoul, South Korea. He's a producer covering politics and culture of the Korean Peninsula, and we have the very good fortune of him spending some time here in Washington, D.C., where he is currently the visiting North America correspondent for the BBC. So, Jake, it's so great to have you with us.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure. Wonchul Kim is the Washington-based correspondent for the Hankyoreh Shinmun, the Hankyoreh newspaper, covering U.S. politics, foreign policy, and U.S.-Korea relations. He is also host of Correspondent's America Talk, a YouTube series analyzing American politics for Korean viewers. I have to watch that. I really have to watch that. Yeah, that's great. So viewers, you can watch our podcast, but you should also watch Wonchul's YouTube series, Correspondent's America Talk. Anyway, like I said, today, the title of our episode is Getting Started, the new Lee Jae-myung government. And I thought the most current thing that we could talk about is, of course, the G7 summit in Canada, President Lee's first foreign trip as leader, barely a week into his time in office. So there are things that happened and didn't happen on this trip. The thing that happened was, of course, him being there among all these world leaders. I mean, Korea was one of several major powers that were invited as part of the so-called G7 plus contingent this year. Korea, among them Korea, Brazil, India. So clearly put on a world stage, at the very beginning of his time in office. Important meeting, first bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan, including all of his other meetings that took place there. And of course, the meeting that didn't happen with President Trump. The meeting was scheduled for the last day, I think it was, of the G7 summit. But then President Trump left a day early because of the situation in Israel and Iran. This isn't the first time Trump has left the G7 summit early. I think we'll all remember, as people who cover Korea, that the last time in 2018, President Trump, the G7 summit was again in Canada, and President Trump left a day early to go to Singapore to meet the North Korean leader. So Korea seems to figure in G7 summits and U.S. presidents leaving a day early. But maybe, Wonchul, if I could start with you and just ask you first, from your perspective, how important was it for President Lee to go to the G7 summit, his meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister, and then, of course, I assume that there was some disappointment that the meeting with President Trump didn't happen.
Yeah. In a way, it was a bummer because the presidential office really tried to focus on meeting with Donald Trump because there was an urgency in terms of the tariff negotiations. Mm-hmm. It's just less than 1 month, right? It's until July 8th. So they very hope that this meeting will facilitate on ground the negotiations, but it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. So they explicitly very disappointed, and they said they would reschedule the meeting, maybe upcoming NATO summit right next week. Mm-hmm. They they have this. I think they have decided to go there, but not announced officially. But they already asked the press to ask the press trip to cover that summit. So
they did.
Yeah, they did.
Okay.
So I guess they already decided. But on the other hand, they had a chance to meet with Ishiba. So with the failure of meeting with Donald Trump, Lee Jae-myung, in a sense, had a chance to highlight the shift towards the Japan. Like Lee Jae-myung administration, they really quite serious about their shift towards Japan. And this meeting by meeting Ishiba at G7, it was really good chance for them to show their shift. Yeah.
That's great. Jake, your thoughts on this as well. I think it's interesting that if they were ever, and I understand they were not entirely certain about whether they were going to go to The Hague for the NATO summit, because of the non-meeting that took place, there's really an incentive now to go to the NATO summit. So that's interesting. And like you said, the absence of the meeting with Trump actually made the meeting with Ishiba that much more important. So in a sense, it's not ideal, but it didn't necessarily turn out badly because, at least from my perspective, Lee's going to go now to NATO, which is a good thing. But I mean, Jake, from your perspective, how were you thinking about this? What was the domestic reaction to both the Ishiba meeting and also the absence of the meeting with President Trump?
Yeah, well, what I saw was, Lee Jae-myung kind of being tested for the first time in a very world stage. And he was apparently making a very good icebreaker with all these leaders. Apparently, a lot of the world leaders wanted to talk to him about the martial law. That was one topic they wanted to talk to him about. And he really appealed himself by talking about his difficult childhood, coming from nothing and really achieving great success, especially with other leaders like Lula and Modi. But yeah, the two major meetings that we're really watching for was Trump and Ishiba, and President Trump essentially snubbed all these other leaders by not showing up for the last day. But Ishiba meeting, what we saw was him talking about leaving some of these difficulties and differences between two countries behind, and really let's have a future-oriented relationship. Let's build upon what's already there. And what I saw is really this commitment to continue the previous administration's relationship with Japan, which is probably going to assuage a lot of the concerns a lot of watchers had that there might be more tension now that a Democratic Party candidate has become the president. And I think this will be a theme that comes up again probably in our talk, but from Lee Jae-myung government's perspective, a lot of the politically inconvenient work has been done by his predecessor Yoon Suk-yeol, and some of these things that are politically thorny amongst South Korean perspective, things like historical stuff, something like forced labor issue. Those were the difficult steps were already taken by the Yoon Suk-yeol government, so he could possibly inherit them. He already said on his day one of the presidency that he will continue the commitment to the agreement already negotiated with the Japanese on the forced labor issue. So he may quietly kind of talk about those issues, but really it will be a future forward kind of what he calls pragmatic administration.
Does it? Does it surprise you, Jake, that Lee Jae-myung is taking this particular position on Japan, like coming out right away and saying, "I'm not going to ditch the labor compensation deal"? Was that surprising to you in a way? And then also, for both Jake and Wonchul, how did the Lee government explain to the Korean public the non-meeting with Trump and Lee? I'm sure it was embarrassing as a first step for the new government. So.
For me, it wasn't surprising that he is taking this tack when it comes to foreign policy. I really did see him as a pragmatist, which is the biggest message really out of this government, that he is not an ideologue. I think this was one concern that Washington had over him, that he's going to be soft on China and soft on North Korea, that he's going to ditch this pro-alliance stance of Yoon Suk-yeol government. But he appointed Wi Sung-lak, who is a well-known pro-alliance, very friendly figure to the Washington, and he has been making all these steps to kind of taking a step to the right. He famously said, "Now we're a centrist right-wing, party," and I think there was some truth to that. And of course, when he made that comment about the forced labor, how he's going to inherit the current agreement, of course, his nationalist faction immediately protested it, and said that this is not what they were looking for. But he simply brushed it off and keep walking. And I think that really what he's looking for is to really put all the priority of his government, all the political capital, in what the Korean voters really care for, the zeitgeist of the day, which is to boost the economy.
Yeah. Wonchul, what are your thoughts on that? And then also we can move into a discussion, since Jake started, we can move into a discussion of some of the appointments that he's made.
When it comes to the policy towards Japan, I think Lee's shift is based on the public sentiment. The Korean public sentiment has shifted a lot, I think, compared to 5 or 6 years ago. It's a part of because of the geographical change, the tension between America and China, and the ties between Russia and North Korea. So Korean public sentiment has changed. Korean people see more Japan as allies compared to China, should I say. And according to recent polls, the positive reaction to Japan is the historically high, 47% in Korea. And it is also historically high in Japan. So based on those kind of sentiment change, Lee is very confident about his shift.
Interesting. Yeah, so both of you, what I hear from both of you is that there's kind of a trifecta of things that have moved Lee in this very pragmatic direction. There's U.S.-China competition, there's Russia-DPRK cooperation, and then there's also Korea de-risking from both China and the United States, right? And so those are three very powerful things that can move a government in that direction. Let's talk a little bit about the appointments, some of the appointments that they've made. They haven't all come through, but many of the key appointments on the national security team, some rumors, I don't know, my information may be more than a day old, but also some rumors about unification minister, some of these things. Maybe we could why don't we talk about that? Why don't we start with Wi Sung-lak? Jake raised it, but why don't we start with Wi Sung-lak? Also a good friend of CSIS, so please.
Wi Sung-lak is well-known figure as a very pro-alliance group. And Lee Jae-myung, he embraced Wi Sung-lak a few years ago, and that decision changed him a lot, I think. And there were several advisors around Lee Jae-myung, but Lee Jae-myung picked Wi Sung-lak as a top national security advisor, and that gave very important signals to the world, I think. And Wi Sung-lak, as you know, he is just traditional and seasoned in diplomat, and he is very well versed about the alliance with U.S. and Japan and trilateral relationships. So one of the top advisors from the Lee Jae-myung diplomatic teams, he said in a private conversation that he very severely criticized Moon Jae-in's approach towards the North Korea, the so-called the driving seat approach. That he said it doesn't make sense at all. So his team is very solid in that sense. And should I say, Lee Jae-myung's diplomatic stance is quite similar to Yoon's in terms of the U.S. and Japan. compared to Moon Jae-in. Yeah, so the only difference is maybe China policy. Yeah, so yeah.
I think we're seeing Lee Jae-myung government stacking its foreign policies people with people who have extensive experience in Washington. You know, Lee Sung-nak, of course, served as the department chief of the North America. He also had a lot of experience, you know, with people in Washington. He actually acted as the spokesperson, really, for Lee Jae-myung on his campaign trail, meeting all these people in Washington. He was meeting these Western journalists as well as academics, trying to really appeal Lee Jae-myung as a very pragmatic leader who can be quite fluid. He's definitely not an ideologue, you know, who is very pro-alliance. And he also, Lee Jae-myung also appointed it as the first kind of, what will we say, the deputy State Department, sort of the first minister, vice foreign minister, who had spent also extensive time in Washington. Himself. Yeah. So he's stacking his cabinet with people who have a lot of focus on facing the USA, and we also heard Yeo Han-gu, who is now appointed as the trade chief, who has experience of negotiating with the Trump administration 1.0 to get the new FTA deal. So, you know, I think a lot of focus that we're seeing is that, you know, this first cabinet that's going to be very much focused on dealing with the U.S. And we'll see if that really pans out or not. But it really shows how much in Lee Jae-myung's mind this dealing with President Trump and his tariff is really at the top of the priority.
And then, so you mentioned Yeo Han-gu, who was actually spent some time in D.C. He was a scholar, visiting scholar at the Peterson Institute just down the street from here. I've also heard the former deputy trade minister, former deputy national security advisor, Kim Hyun-jung, also has been mentioned. What role do you think he'll play in this administration? Or I don't know if there's been any announcements yet or anything, but what role do you think he would play in this administration?
Kim Hyun-jung, you said?
Yeah, Kim Hyun-jung, yeah. He was deputy national security advisor in Moon Jae-in.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Hot-headed guy. Yeah. I can say that because I know him. We went to college together, actually.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Many people expected him to be one of the top positions, like National Security Advisor or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or something like that. But now he is somewhat out of radar, we guess. Maybe there must be some power struggle inside the camp. Yeah, so for now I think he is waiting for the calls.
He might be a counterweight.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I see a mixture in Lee Jae-myung's current government composition. I mean, of course, we have to see a lot of how the rest of the cabinets are filled. I think President Lee has been very busy with all these, like going to the G7 meeting. He now has to go to NATO summit. You know, it's really taking him away from the task of filling his cabinet. But so far, what we've seen is a lot of career, bureaucrats as well as professors who are being appointed. A lot of technocrats as well. What we saw is a mixture of both people who are very loyal to him, who has been there through and through, and people who relatively joined recently. So I think it's still at a stage where it's difficult to define Lee Jae-myung, and I think of Lee Jae-myung as a very fluid politician who is very adept at kind of sniffing out what the zeitgeist of the day is, or what the voters are looking for. So I think there's a lot of room for him to maneuver, and he has been proving himself very adept at doing that.
Let me ask so. There are clearly it's pragmatic on the foreign policy side, national security side, as you said, stacked with some folks with a lot of U.S. experience. NIS director Lee Jong-suk, and then rumored unification minister Chung Dong-young. These are diehard progressives, right? That served in past administrations. When I was in government, I dealt with both of them. I think Chung Dong-young was actually the unification minister during Nomuhyun, and I dealt with him there. What do you think? What do you think about those appointments?
Yeah, some people say it's a kind of like strategical appointments. Like on one hand, the Lee Jae-myung with the pro-alliance camps, and the other hand, the pro-autonomy groups. So Lee Jong-suk is one of the top figures of the pro-autonomy groups, definitely. So there was some rumors about the issue with going to NATO summits. Yeah, the pro-autonomy groups see the NATO summit as a kind of bad signal to China and Russia. But finally, the president decided to go to the summit. So I think that gives some signals that, at least for now, the pro-alliance, like Lee Sung-nak, is taking the lead in the cabinets.
Do you think, Jake, do you think that, this is an interesting point because the pro-autonomy groups look at the NATO summit and they see it as a trap, right? Getting pulled into, West versus China, Russia. Whereas the Lee Sung-lak types look at the NATO summit and they say, no, this is your chance to be on the global stage, global Korea, these things. Do you think that President Lee likes that? Do you think he likes to be on the global stage? He's been a local politician his whole life. Do you think he likes the idea of being on the global stage, or that he prefers being in the pro-autonomy camp?
Well, I think he sees the necessity of engaging the world leaders to really enact the goal that he's been saying, that he wants to give South Korea another boost in economy, and that it really cannot be done in South Korea alone. A lot of that is going to hinge on South Korea being able to negotiate a really favorable trade deals. And this is something we saw at the G7. What the presidential office was telling us is that the focus of the G7 meeting was really trade and industry and investment. And I think this is something that President Lee really needs to foster a really good relationship with all these world leaders. And maybe one difference from his predecessor is going to be how he deals with China as well as Russia, who, in the previous time were really close economic partner with South Korea, and China still is a very big partner, but there's extra tension now. And he also has to deal with, of course, this very bipartisan anti-China sentiment that is getting stronger and stronger in South Korea. But I think one point I wanted to also make about the appointment of Lee Jong-suk and these Jung Dong-young possibly was that North Korea in South Korea's kind of foreign policy priority is now at the very bottom compared to the previous time. With North Korea refusing to speak to South Korea, to Seoul, there isn't much that people who are sitting at the Unification Ministry, who are sitting at the National Intelligence Service, which is really, although it is a spice agency, its like main work is to deal with North Korea. There isn't a lot that they can do. So even if he is giving these very important positions to these more pro-autonomy group, it isn't as important as some of these other seats that were given to pro-U.S., pro-alliance groups. So it may as well just end up being this figurehead, sinecure kind of job for the next 5 years of Lee Jae-myung government.
Yeah. I think so. I just jotted down here the things. I guess they did some token things right at the start, like turning off the loudspeakers, stopping the balloon launches, which I'm sure many of our friends who are human rights activists are very upset with. And then it called for reinstituting the comprehensive military agreement. So I guess you're saying that that's about the most that they could do at this point, given the bandwidth, and that the number one priority is the tariffs. And so let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about, like, what is, I agree with you. How is the Lee government going to approach this? This is, the most important issue. The South Korean exports have already been hit hard by this, right? We talked about this earlier, like 8% down year on year, South Korean exports to the United States. Auto exports down double-digit percentage year on year. Bank of Korea cut the growth rate in half right? And so there's a lot of pressure to get something done on this. I mean, how do you think that the government is going to approach this?
I think Lee Jae-myung, he is also very transactional. So in that sense, the Trump and Lee Jae-myung can make a good deal. But at the same time, because they have both like have the same trait, like transactional, that could be risk factor as well, I think. And on top of that, I heard from my source that the Korean government is trying to make Trump's big deal even bigger deal, like adding more things that Korea want to get from the U.S., like such as the nuclear guideline agreement with U.S., things like that, revising those kind of things.
Revising the 1, 2, 3 agreement.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3 agreement.
Yeah.
So he said, like, we can give away anything that U.S. wants, but we have to ask more that we have longed for. So if I'm not sure right now, Lee Jae-myung is going to take that strategy right away, but if he take that strategy, it's going to be a high risk and high return negotiations.
I see. Yeah, Jake, what do you think?
No, I completely agree that this is a high risk, high return situation. First of all, a lot of President Trump's decisions really hinges on his personal diplomacy, how he feels personally about these leaders he's dealing with. And I have a feeling that President Trump is not particularly fond of South Korea or South Korean leaders he had dealt with in the past. And yes, there is this idea that there are the tariff problem, which South Korea is trying to really get it down to zero, especially when it comes to sectorial tariffs on steel, automobile, these kind of things. And of course, there's a looming 25% reciprocal tariff that they really need to get it away. But at the same time, there's the security agreement that President Trump is really squeezing South Korea to pay more for the defense cost division, which already was negotiated during the Biden era, just because they knew this was coming, right? They already negotiated the next how years is going to be. But President Trump doesn't really seem to give it a lot of stock to whatever was negotiated previously. So I think one of the suggestion that is being circling around is, maybe South Korea can give up some concession with security in exchange for tariffs to really put them together, something that would normally be considered separate, one big package deal. But really, it's like approaching a dark, opaque box without knowing what the outcome will be.
Well, and the thing about that, when you enlarge the deal like that, like you move out of the trade space, like you move out of just talking about tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, and you start talking about defense or civil nuclear. The thing about when you do that is that can only be negotiated at the very top, right? Because in terms of bureaucracy, it's impossible to try to organize that among the interagencies to get everybody to agree and make agreements in time for the summit. That can only be negotiated at the top and dictated down. So it really does become a high stakes leader-to-leader negotiation. So a lot of drama there. Let me just ask you one last question. It's a big question to ask, and we don't have much time left, and that is, there's I think the defense minister of Russia just made another announcement that 1,500 North Korean troops are going to help with reconstruction in the recaptured territories in Kursk, in Ukraine, Russia. They've already dispatched, we're up near 20,000 troops. And the level of cooperation between DPRK, Russia now is really unprecedented. How is President Lee going to deal with that? How is he going to approach that? Is that part of an inter-Korean discussion, or how do you think he's going to approach something like that?
Yeah, this is very tricky situation. Yeah. And basically, the Lee Jae-myung administration will echo the U.S. in condemning North Korea's troop deployment, and in fact, they already have. And they are also likely to focus on the strengthening ties and cooperation with the U.S. and Japan, of course. But I'd really like to explore is their Russia policy. since it's closely tied to this issue. It's clear that the Lee administration is intent on normalizing relations with Russia, and like Lee Sung-nak, he was the ambassador in Russia as well. And I believe they'll be looking for like any opportunity to start dialogue with Moscow. And in fact, engaging with Russia has traditionally been one of South Korea's strategies to weaken Russia's ties with North Korea. Like something like President, as long ago, Notae here in early 1990s, right? But of course, today's geographical environment is very different from that. But the window for engagement is probably very narrow. But still, Lee's determination seems very strong. And one of his major campaign pledges was to develop Busan into a key hub for Arctic route. So he said, like, to make that happen, diplomacy is the top priority, especially with the U.S. and Russia. So I will do that. That's his pledge while his campaign trail. So I think if there is a chance for Putin to visit Korea, the APEC season, there might be some chance for Lee Jae-myung and Putin have dialogue and have some good talk. And that might slightly help to weaken that tie a little bit.
Interesting.
I don't know how you have read the South Korea's statement in response to North Korea sending more, troops or workers to Russia, but I felt it was quite a weak, maybe a limp statement. We don't simply saying, "Oh, we don't agree with it." I mean, it was very, very weakened statement, but it kind of shows this government's approach to North Korea. I believe it is, I feel like a lot of these major decisions when it comes to North Korea-South Korea relationship has been made before Lee Jae-myung got into office, and there isn't a lot of room for maneuver. Russia and North Korea, of course, have moved so far beyond what was initially considered the red line. If there was a red line, they've crossed it multiple times at this point. So what can really this government do to start to untangle that? I think this is also why for this government, their dealing with North Korea will be simply about managing the symptoms rather than trying to cure it. I think during the Moon Jae-in time, there was this real sense that, okay, we can do something to get a real result here. We can really move the needle. But with this government, I think there's a lot less optimism. In fact, there's a lot of pessimism towards achieving something with North Korea, even amongst the general public. And, for Lee Jae-myung government, this is not a winning issue. North Korea is really not a sexy policy anymore, not a sexy issue anymore. So yes, we will see him trying to do some kind of deal with maybe Russia, which they can see as a weaker point in the link in the armor. But when it comes to North Korea, I don't expect I don't expect anything significant to be done.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So very interesting. So we're finishing on the point I think I hear both of you saying, which is that if we look forward on this issue, there's a better chance that we could see something transpiring between Lee and Russia in terms of a more normalized relationship, assuming post ceasefire, if we ever get to a ceasefire in Ukraine. More chance of that happening than some breakthrough in inter-Korean relations. That's about all the time we have. I want to thank both Jake and Wonchul for joining us. Jake Kwon from the BBC, Wonchul Kim from the Hankyoreh Shinmun, Hankyoreh newspaper. I want to thank all of our listeners. I should just tell you, you can't see this on the screen, but Jake and Wonchul also happen to be two of the tallest correspondents in Washington, D.C. You can't see them because they're sitting at the table, but they're both very tall. But thanks to all of our listeners and viewers for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Impossible State.